morning, everybody. Welcome once again to Missionary Aid International or Missionary Enterprises. Today we're Sunday, December 15th, 2013. Of course, your host today is yours and truly, Pierre or Pierre Roussel. I'm French, obviously, and of course we have a French side to this, so we just encourage you out there who know French people, who don't understand the English language very well, get them to listen to what we do on the French side of it too. And eventually, we will have, by God's grace, we'll have different languages too, with interpretations and things like that, to reach a wider audience. So as I mentioned last week in the intro, that I was going to get into my autobiography. Not my biography, because I'm still alive and I'm doing my own biography, so it's autobiography, self-biography, or testimony. And I briefly touched on it last week, that God had given me the idea to do that. And when I reflected on that, what He had given me to do, I said, you know what? That's perfect. It just makes perfect sense. Why? First of all, biographies are powerful. Not all of them, but a lot of a good biography is very powerful, encouraging. It also brings correction in the believer's life and also the unbeliever's life, because a lot of the stuff a lot of this recording that we're doing and we will be doing is towards the church, but there's going to be a lot being said that the world needs to hear. So if you have friends out there that are not saved, encourage them to tune in. An autobiography. One of the things, I wasn't even going to make some notes. And last night I was in prayer and I just started getting some verses and started getting some ideas. So I really felt like the Lord was giving me the ideas to jot them down, to give me a little bit of a guideline. So that I'm not all over the place, but at the same time there is a place for rabbit trails. We hear that term often, and actually it's a Hebrew term. And the Jewish rabbis, they use rabbit trails to teach the word in Judaism. And I'm not going to get into Judaism or anything like that, but because we're a part of the new creation, and I'm not going to get into that right now, but sometimes, you know, you start sharing on something and that you need to camp there a little bit longer. You need to get into greater detail. You need to accentuate or emphasize certain things, because a lot of biographies, my biography or my autobiography, whatever, it's common. It's really not uncommon to man, because sin is not uncommon to man. It's very common in the world, obviously. The world is ridden with sin. And the first part of my autobiography, will be my BC days, before Christ days, the days before I got born again. So I'm going to start off a little bit from when I was born, and we're going to move pretty quickly through that until I started getting into some activities and some behaviors that I wish I'd never got into, and which led me to my getting born again later on in life. So I just want to start today, first of all, that also autobiographies, they will make people uncomfortable, and especially family members, because a lot of times the family is part of, it's a no-brainer, but the family is part of your life. And friends, neighbors, and I'm not out to mention names or drop names or anything like that, not at this time anyhow, but you can't help but include other people in your sharing what took place in your life, because you don't live a life of solitude on planet Earth. You just don't overall. And I was a social butterfly before I got born again, and of course I went into the whole area of solitude for years for seeking God and all that. But you cannot help but mention things that people, if they hear your biography, they're going, oh, he's talking about me. Well, I may be talking about you, but don't get all, don't get all fussy about it. You know, you've got an autobiography, and it would probably include me in there, some things that maybe I wouldn't want people to know, but I'm pretty well an open book. And of course, the Lord gave me that vision there years ago about being transparent. So that's what I'm going to do. Whether they like it or not, I'm going to be transparent. And I'm not trying to be like somebody else. This is my biography. This is my life. So anyhow, I was born 1963, April 6. That's right, I'm 50 years old. I'm going on 51 in April. And I was born in the hospital in Sturgeon Falls, Ontario, which is a very small town, a French community. And actually, we lived in Verner, Ontario. And that's about half hour, a little bit further than Sturgeon Falls, which is about 4.5 hours north from here. And it's cold up there. They think, my friends in Africa, they think it's cold now here in Oshawa. They don't know nothing about cold, because up there it's so cold that I remember when we were go to visit some relatives at night, we'd walk home at sometimes 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was a little boy, and the snowbanks were like 10 feet high, and the skidoos were flying around, stuff like that, and my nostrils would stick together. That's how cold it was up there, and it still is cold up there. It's even past the snow belt. So that's how I was born, and I was born in a condition that I was not very healthy. And actually my mom told me that I cried for day and night for 6 months straight. They didn't know what was wrong with me. And I touch on these things because it had an effect on my life later on. And then this all ties in. It all ties in. I'm not getting into details if I don't have to. But I was very sick for the first 6 months after being born. And David, my cameraman, he's going to put up some images eventually on the screen to show different things to add a little bit to my autobiography. But so I was sick, and the doctors couldn't quite figure out what was wrong with me at that time, and they came to the conclusion that I couldn't digest my mother's breast milk. So they put me on a formula, and I was not taking that in either. So I was causing a lot of problems, not only to myself at that time, even at a young age, but I was causing a lot of problems in a household. Having a crying baby night and day for 6 months straight. That I don't have kids yet, but I can just imagine. I heard the stories. So eventually, we at the age of 3 years old, my dad had started working here in General Motors, so we eventually moved over here to Oshawa, and actually not too far from here, we moved into an apartment. Just to make things easier for my dad. And so raised Catholic, Roman Catholic. The French community, especially Northern Ontario, is very Roman Catholic, and today it's a little bit different, but back then it was all Catholicism, and I mentioned that for a specific reason too, and not to put down the Catholic Church, anything like that. So we moved over here, and started going to school, of course, at around the age of 4 or 5, preschool, pre-kindergarten, all that, at a Catholic school, Corpus Christi, not too far from here. Started attending church, all that. Assomption de Notre Dame, that's the French, because it's French school, French church. And my life was basically as normal as it gets overall. Sports, playing with your neighbors, playing cops and robbers and things like that. And at a young age, I got into the music. I really enjoyed music. I remember listening to people like Donny Osmond and things like that, the Beach Boys and all that. And I was really, there's a lot of music in our family, especially on my dad's side, the Rousset family. A lot of musicians, especially back there, over there and up north, it's a lot of fiddles and guitar playing and stuff like that. And of course, sitting around and drinking and all that. So I had a really strong bent towards music, so I started playing music at the age of 11, playing guitar, started taking guitar lessons, and started listening to some rock bands eventually. I had a friend of mine, he lived the next street over, he had a guitar, electric guitar, with a little amp, and of course that was all exciting to me, and that pushed me forward a little bit in this whole area of music. And unfortunately, I got into some bands that I wish I had not gotten into, and especially rock bands, heavy metal bands, things like that. Now, in saying all of this at this time, there's an underlying thought here. There's an underlying theme, I guess I would call it. It's the power of influence. Also, at that time, you know, promiscuity today is not what it was back then, but it was around. It's been around ever since the fall of man. So sexual promiscuity, and I had some friends at school that started giving me some magazines, and of course some of the girls living in my street, a little bit older than me. I don't want to get into the detail or anything like that. So it was not having a good influence on me. But I was pretty young. I was about 14 years old at that time. But it was having, slowly but surely, you know, influence is powerful, but sometimes it's extremely subtle. So not knowing what was happening inside of me, I kept on going that path a little bit. Of course, going to church, going to school, Catholic school, having good grades, and doing good in school. And but it came to a time where I did not want to go to church anymore. I just was fed up with it, and I guess I don't remember this, but my mom told my dad we're not going to force him. And this was around the age of 15. And that's when I started getting into some behavior that I shouldn't have never got into. And this is the summer of my transition between grade 8, which was at Carpus Christi. I graduated, good grades, really good grades, and then went to, the next year was going to a French high school in Toronto called Etienne Brulé. That's when everything changed for me. And it was not good. So I want to touch on that a little bit. In Proverbs 9:4, it says, just give you the gist of it here, a simple one is easily led astray. That's the term, that's one of the best definitions for the word simple. Well, I was number one simple. I got so influenced so easily. Looking back, I asked the Lord for years, what in the world happened to me? I mean, I went from really good grades, and eventually I'm going to get into this, I went from really good grades to actually literally getting thrown out of three different schools, the same school twice. Etienne Brulé, twice they told me, we don't want you back the second time. They said, never come back here again. And then I went to two other schools here in Oshawa, high schools. And my second school, McLaughlin, I got actually 1 credit out of 1 year. And actually I had to fight to get my second credit, which was my French, out of all things. I'm fluent French, but my teacher did not like me at all, and I understand why. Because of the drugs and all that, and of course O'Neill over here, I lasted 2 months, all drug related. So what happened that summer is that not really good friends of mine, but neighbors, introduced me to marijuana, and the first time I smoked a joint, actually we smoked 2 joints right in the park, right behind my house here. I got hooked. I loved it. I had other friends later on, they tried it, they hated it. I loved it. I got hooked. I mean, the devil got me hook, line, and sinker. And not too long after that, I had some other friends, so-called friends, and I'm not trying to put the blame on them because we're going to look at some verses here in a few minutes that I should have been able to resist all of that. Yes, even as an unbeliever, you can resist sin to a certain degree. Because the Proverbs is full of that, and they were not born again back then. But I was introduced to beer, alcohol, and I had my first 5 beers, and I got drunk, and I was not good at home, and I got hooked. I loved it. And before all of that, before even the drugs, I had somebody I was going to school with. he was smoking cigarettes. I don't know exactly how it all happened, but anyhow, all I know is I had my first cigarette. It didn't taste the best, but I kept on smoking, and that led to all these other things. And at that time, I was dealing with a couple girls in this neighborhood that were a little bit too loose, and they started getting me to go down a path that I shouldn't have never went down, and which led to me being extremely promiscuous in my teenage years, right until the very day that I got born again at the age of 31 in Drummondville, Quebec in 1994. So I want to touch on that a little bit. There's another verse here in Proverbs 22:15. It says that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. When I saw that, because I was seeking the Lord, I said, what happened to me? I needed to understand what happened to me, especially with getting to school, because I love studying now. I wanted to go back to school after I got saved. I wanted to go back to high school, college. I wanted to go back. I wanted to go to Bible school. I wanted to go to seminary. I just want to learn. And God had put that in me, and eventually, I built a library and all that. Eventually will be for the Bible school, for the training of missionaries. But anyhow, this thing here, in the heart of a child, foolishness, and the rod of correction will drive it far from him. Well, you know what? I don't want to blame anybody, but there is a place to find out where the blame goes. And yes, I was partly to blame, but I was not raised in a family that that had a lot of understanding of sin and how these things work in the sinner's life and childhood and surroundings, neighbors and friends, and even the influences at schools and stuff like that, how to protect your children and all that. It's a trap that I would say I've heard I've watched the documentaries over the years, and I've heard the statistics. What I went through is nothing new. My goodness, I keep hearing it over and over and over and over again, how children, teenagers, now it's getting younger and younger all the time, but my goodness, teenagers are just getting sucked right into this life of basically debauchery. And that's all there is to it. That's what it is. A lewdness, sexual, immoral conduct, And so I went right down that path for years. And I mean years. 16 years. Until I got born again and got totally delivered from all of that. So this could have been dealt with at a very young age, and but my parents didn't know how to deal with it, and my mom was my dad was working a lot, and basically my mom was by herself in trying to deal with this. Eventually, because of the drinking, the parties, I started breaking the law. That's common too. I started committing crimes. My first arrest was right in this home. The RCMP showed up at 6 a.m. in the morning. It was my birthday, 16th birthday. 2 undercover police officers knocked on the door. I was sleeping. We had just broken into a school here in Oshawa the night before. And we got away, and I won't get into the details of it, but it's amazing that I didn't die that night because of what happened. But all I know is one of my friends got caught by the police, and he snitched on us. And so they came knocking on the door. They actually walked right into my room, and they asked, "You're Pierre?" And I said, "Yes, I am." They said, "Well, you did this and that last night, that." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you're under arrest." They let me get dressed in my room. They watched me get dressed. And they put the handcuffs on me. They took me into their car, undercover car, with 2 of my other friends that got caught too. So that, and I remember when I walked out the door, I remember hearing my mom on the couch, just bawling, just weeping. And I mention that for many reasons, because I like to give honor where honor's due, because my mother ended up praying for 15 years for me after that. and she even had people praying for me. But the thing is, though, is that I remember one day my mom said to me, "What did we do to you for you to do all this to us?" Because after that first time, it was not the last time. I ended up going to the Whitby jail. I ended up doing weekends because I was working. So they let me keep my job, and I started doing weekends because I was committing all kinds of crimes because of the influence of drugs and alcohol and the wrong friends and stuff like that. Well, why do I mention all that? Why? Because my mom asked me that day. She goes, "What did we do to deserve all this?" And my response at that time was, "What's the problem? I'm doing it to me and not to you." But I didn't realize, when you're hurting yourself, you hurt everybody around. Well, those who care about you anyhow, you hurt them around you too. And that was a rude awakening for me after I got born again. This born again stuff, it works. It's the best thing that's on planet Earth, and we need to hear more about it. So anyhow, they dragged me off, and that's when a whole series of going to court and this and that and that and this, and I had committed other crimes before that, and they started tying things together, and they said, "You're responsible for that theft over there and that," and they started, I said, "Yeah," and all that. So I had all these charges coming up against me, and my parents had to come to court with me, my mom especially. My dad had to work, and so that was not good at all. And it was having a toll on my mom, her health, and it was having a toll on me. But I was still young, full of life, full of vigor, full of vitality. I felt invincible, but things eventually caught up. I just want to share a little bit here, just to describe the nature of sin, because the Word is pretty explicit concerning these things. And here in Ephesians 2, this is the Amplified, Paul is talking here about our BC days, but it still gives us light concerning those who have not experienced a new birth yet. And here it talks about the sinner following the course and fashion of this world, being under the sway of the tendency of this present age, following the prince of the power of the air, obedient to and under the control of demons. That's right, demons. Somehow, demons got into my life, because I did not do this all on my own. There was an influence going on there, and that's what I saw later on. Once I got born again, or I got into the Word and I started praying about these things, what happened, Lord? There were demons that were out to get me. And they're not just out to get me, they're out to get a lot of people out there. And I'm going to get into this quite down the road. The enemy, he's not omniscient like God. But I heard different preachers preach on this. Mike Murdoch's one of them, and Robert Slairden. And the enemy, he can discern quote-unquote greatness in somebody at a young age. He can discern callings, because remember, Lucifer, that's his name before he fell, he's been studying mankind ever since mankind came into creation. He's the reason mankind fell. Of course, Adam had freedom to resist the enemy. So the blame, if we're going to get into that later on, much later on, but Adam could have stopped the whole thing. But the enemy was there. He's the one who incited him. He's the one who tempted him. He's the one who allured him. And that's what happened with me. And that's what's happening with a lot of kids out there. And teenagers and young adults and even parents out there. They're being enticed by demons. Demon spirits that still constantly work in the sons of disobedience. That's a powerful statement. the careless, the rebellious, in the unbelieving who go against the purposes of God. Well, guaranteed I was going against the purposes of God. And I wasn't born again. But I was going against the purposes of God out of total ignorance. And if there's a breeding ground, if there's an open door for the enemy to work, it's ignorance of the truth, of his schemes and his tactics to bring you down. Because in John 10:10 it says the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But see, I had a mother, Catholic at the time, but she eventually became charismatic, praying for me. Verse 3, it says here, conducting ourselves in the passions of our flesh, our behavior governed by our corrupt and sensual nature. Now, I put emphasis on this because this is going to bring us right into the new birth. Because the new birth is about a new nature that God gives us through regeneration / recreation. Actually, it's the very nature that Jesus was born with in his humanity. That's what makes us all sons of God. Him being the firstborn. And I'll be teaching on that until I'm out of here. And I don't mean just today, I mean over the years. Because there's a lot of ignorance concerning the new birth out there, even in the church world. Our corrupt and sensual nature, obeying the impulses of the flesh, of the sin nature, and the thoughts of the mind, our cravings dictated by our senses, or the sense man, and our dark imaginings. Senses and imaginings. We get the word image in there. And we're going to get into that big time because the soul, the psyche of man, is a breeding ground for images. It's a carrier of images. And I carried around images on the inside of me for years, even after I got born again, wrong images. Because no one had taught me how to sow the word, which carries images, new images. We were then by nature because of the sin nature, children of God's wrath. Now, I didn't write this. And man did not write this. The Holy Spirit wrote this. Not to condemn man, but to reveal to man what he's really like at his core in his fallen state. And this is going to bring us right into this whole thing of God's plan of redemption, God's plan of salvation for man via the new birth. A new race, a new Adam, a new nature, a new identity, a new image. We lost the image of God back in the garden. Genesis 5:3. Children of God's wrath and heirs of his indignation, like the rest of mankind. This is very descriptive of what I gave myself over to because of some of these verses that I had shared here. Proverbs 22:15, Proverbs 9:4. It talks about the simple easily being led astray. Like I said before, I had some friends or some acquaintances that they resisted. They weren't born again. They resisted the drugs. They resisted the promiscuity because something had been put in them in their home. And I'm not, like I said, biographies can make people uncomfortable. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I'm just saying the way it is and the way it was. And things were not being put in me to safeguard myself against these things that were out there. So when these things came into my life, I just took it in. And one of the things that I've learned about Pierre is whether it's good or bad, when I'm drawn to something, When I like something, I go ahead, I jump in. I go in all the way. I had a friend of mine, and he was actually a good friend, and he said one thing about Pierre: when he smokes drugs, he smokes drugs. When he drinks, he drinks. When he's chasing women, he chases women, meaning that's his focus. He becomes narrow-minded. And that's what happened with me. Sin became very, very, very appealing to me. And actually in the Hebrews, it talks about that there's pleasure to sin, but it's only for a season. So I really took hold of what was being presented to me out there. And especially going into high school, where it's, even back then, the drugs, even the drinking. I started drinking at school a little bit, meeting different people, so-called friends, being invited to parties on the weekends, being involved, getting heavily into music, rock music. And we're talking about rock music. We're talking about like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne, AC/DC, Kiss, and some of you who are not born again yet, they may be going, yeah. It's like, yeah? You know, I wrote a little note quite a few years ago. Why would anybody want to listen to musicians that are either in hell because they died in that condition, or they will go to hell if they don't get born again? And they're leading a whole generation into hell. Why? I mean, if that's not to be too crass, if that's not stupid, and if that's not idiotic, I don't know what is. But that's what the enemy does. He takes advantage of our ignorance of the truth. He takes advantage of our ignorance concerning his ploys, his schemes, his tactics. He takes ignorance of that. Actually, there's a verse here. If I can find it here. It's in 2 Corinthians. And it says right here. And this is towards the believers. So imagine the unbelievers. Where it says in 2 Corinthians 4:4, the God, small g of this world, blinds the mind of unbelievers. So they're blind already. They're blind. They're blind by nature. And then he blinds them on top of that. And here it says, 2 Corinthians 2:12, to keep Satan, or to stop Satan from getting the advantage over us. Now he's talking about believers here. For we are not ignorant of his wiles and intentions. Now actually that word, wiles and intention, it's not a good translation at all. It's in there, but it's actually basically his thoughts. It's the word, it comes from the word nous, N-O-U-S. It's one of the words, the Greek words, that is translated mind in the New Testament, or intellect. So I was very ignorant of these things, not taught, and like I said, I was going to church. I was part of a Catholic church, and the worst part of all that is I remember coming home from Saturday nights after Mass, and my parents would just drop me off right down the street here on Punchin, and they would drop me off there because I met my friends in the park. Valley Park's right there. And then they would drive home, and I'd get dropped off there. Now, they didn't know I was doing this, but I'd go in there, and they'd have a joint waiting for me. This is right after church. You know? So, I'm being pretty transparent here. And there's a reason for it. And the reason is because it's still happening to this day. It's even happening in our evangelical churches. Kids on drugs. I mean, my goodness, I had a pastor friend of mine told me years ago, and I saw this later on TV, a documentary. There are people out there, young people, they have Bible studies and they get high before having their Bible studies. And I got totally set free from all of that when I got born again. So I can go on and on and on about this, but we're gonna pick this up next week, and to really move on a little bit. Because eventually, you know, once I got kicked out of school and all that, I did getting into work, the workforce, getting construction, and end up making some really good money. And of course, you know, when you've got all these addictions, well, the more money you got, the more your addictions flourish. And so we're going to get into that whole area in part 2 next week. So I just want to thank you for your time today. And I pray that you will use this as an encouragement and not to condemn, and that you would share this with friends that you may know that are going through some of these things that I went through years ago. Shalom.